brings us into today's story. Of course, it is Happy Bitcoin Pizza Day, as we talked about. And we've got a nice article from CoinDesk here, right? The story begins, this is actually a really good article, right? But it begins by asking the question that if you owned a share of an experimental technology, how much of it would you give up in order to help that technology grow, right? It goes on to mention that startup founders do this, all the time, that they want to raise capital. And of course, 10 years ago, a software developer by the name of Laszlo Hanyecz did exactly this, right? And, kind of the question, right? Everybody uses this story as the butt of a joke, right? But if you, were into Bitcoin in the early days and you had a piece of that, you had quite a bit of Bitcoin, how much of that Bitcoin would you be willing to give up to help that technology grow at that early critical nascent stage, right? Which is exactly what Mr. Laszlo does, which is exactly why he's celebrated so much, but also, sometimes made fun of, but again, Hanyecz is known as the first person to use Bitcoin in a commercial transaction. So on May 22nd, 2010, 10 years ago today, at a time when Bitcoin was a little over a year old, he bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 BTC. Now, we talked about this earlier kind of in the staff server, but I don't actually think it was the pizzeria that accepted the Bitcoin. I think it was the driver or the delivery person that was just like into Bitcoin and was like, yeah, man, I'll totally take the Bitcoin instead and just like cover the cash. So, good on him, right? Free market capitalism works. Now, this historic day lives on as Bitcoin Pizza Day, and it's celebrated annually by the crypto community. And with one Bitcoin currently around $9,000, as I said, this formative event has become a bit of a joke. And Hanyecz's $45 million pizzas are the punchline, right? But I think that misses the point, right? The joke is also an important tale to tell. It illustrates the competition and interplay between 3 potential uses of Bitcoin, right? The first potential use case of Bitcoin, and one that is often derided, but it's speculation, right? Bitcoin has had a sensational decade of upward price movement, and that's what drives headlines. That's what brings in new investors and new market participants, is this, I'm going to get rich quick, like all of these Bitcoin millionaires that I see on YouTube. But many of those getting into the Bitcoin game, as Hanyecz puts it, Bitcoin is a way to harness greed, right? And he made these comments in a recent interview from his home in Jacksonville, Florida, right? And a lot of people say that this is a bad thing, that people entering Bitcoin for the profits are somehow bad people, but it's greed. And that profit motive that underpins this delicate balance of incentives that keeps Bitcoin running. There's nothing wrong with greed and speculation. You can harness that for positivity. And Hanyecz, I'm sure, understands that balance well, right? He was a contemporary of Satoshi Nakamoto. He claimed they even messaged back and forth a few times. And he was one of the earliest miners who focused on, I don't want to say earliest miners, but he was an early miner. And he actually optimized his mining process to produce more BTC. And as I said, speculation is often treated as though it's not a legitimate use case for Bitcoin. But it is an important aspect of any innovation or any process of introducing new technology into the world. Do you think that venture capitalists are motivated by altruism? They're motivated by a profit motive. And what do you get out of VCs? You get some awesome stuff coming out of VC-backed startups, right? Speculation is an important part of Bitcoin from its birth, right? And this article goes on to quote even Jerome Powell, speaking positively, right? Jerome Powell, the evil individual, speaking positively of Bitcoin's role as a speculative store of value. And the volatility based on this speculation is what makes Bitcoin attractive to traders, investors, right? It also can make it difficult to use as money or as electronic cash, as the Bitcoin white paper originally specified. Like for example, if I pay you in BTC today, there is a high probability that given enough time, one of us is going to get wrecked, right? One of us is going to get wrecked if I pay you in BTC. But again, it is still a valid cross-border, uncensorable, unconfiscatable value transfer. Right, you can still utilize, and we can see this by the amount of money going up over time on chain. It is a beautiful metric, right? It's a beautiful metric to see the amount of real dollar value that is captured on the Bitcoin network and that is used on the Bitcoin network and as it grows every single year. And again, I think that although most companies can't just accept BTC and hodl on it, because I think if they were, they would do well. There are still a lot of payment processors out there that will convert and just average that. But again, I think the way forward is if you run a business, if you are self-employed, if you do any kind of 1099 income, accept BTC as payment, right? And just hold on to it, right? The dollar cost average method does work given enough time, right? So although it might be said that using Bitcoin for everyday purchases as a stable store of value is not really a thing, right? Even though there's things like Lightning Pizza and payment processors coming aboard Bitcoin to help retailers and businesses settle these Bitcoin payments into cash. Again, I think the definite way forward is to hold the spot BTC and stack that up, right? To take that dollar cost average approach. Because, yeah, as Laszlo even says, anybody that's held for 4 years is in the money, right? And although businesses generally cannot afford to do that, right, they have to pay their rent, because Bitcoin's other role here is as digital gold or a store of value, and that will grow over time, and it will become more and more attractive as it grows in value over time. And the Bitcoin halving showed us in real time that Bitcoin's hard-coded issuance schedule stands in stark contrast to all of the central bank money printing that is currently running on overdrive or physical delivery problems in the precious metal space, which is why I believe Bitcoin is a superior form of money to gold and certainly to fiat cash, right? Then, on Wednesday, someone moved Bitcoin that had been sitting untouched since February 2009, okay? Hodling is part of what drives the value of Bitcoin up, right? As low velocity can do for any currency. But low velocity cannot be the whole story, right? If you look at Bitcoin as an experiment, as Hanyecz points out in this article, right? He says, it was a really interesting system, but nobody's using it. If nobody's using it, it doesn't matter if I have it at all, right? So, as widely known and held as Bitcoin may be, it is still an experiment. If the pedigree of the individuals currently working on Bitcoin and the brand name of individuals that are beginning to invest in Bitcoin is any bet, then its viability as digital gold seems to be set in stone for the moment. But the fact is, Bitcoin is malleable just like the precious metal. And as development, innovation, and adoption continues to take place, the idea of merely holding BTC without ever spending it one day might seem as ridiculous as a $45 million pizza today. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Obviously, it's a cool event. There's a lot of fundamentals here that I think people just let go right over their head, zip right over their head. But the point is, this moment was extremely important in Bitcoin's history as cementing the first dollar value price. And here we are 10 years later with Bitcoin sitting right around 9,000. So the value proposition of Bitcoin has been proven time and time again.